Welcome to the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts. I'm the author of It's Deeper Than That and the founder of The Great Reconnection. I'm excited to have here with us today Matt Gilhooly. He has the Life Shift podcast. I was on his podcast and was just so grateful to be on the podcast with him that I invited him onto our podcast today. And I know you're going to learn a lot listening to him. So thank you so much, Matt, for being here.
Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. It's always a pleasure to have people like you on mine and hear your story in that way. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Let's start with, why did you pick the name the Life Shift podcast?
Well, it's a little bit funny because during the pandemic, I got a second master's degree and I took a podcasting class just as part of a mass communications degree. And so my podcast really started as an assignment. And part of the assignment was to list out a title. And so I went through like 30 something titles, and the life shift really resonated with me because of my own personal story, and just felt like there are so many people in this world, probably everyone, that have these pivotal moments, and from which one moment to the next, everything has shifted from what it was into something new. And so it just makes me think of this line in the sand for a lot of people, and that's what I focus the conversations on. So it's really grounded me in a way of inviting guests and hearing people's stories in that way.
And what was the defining moment for you?
Well, the one when I was starting the podcast, and I could probably pick a bunch of different ones at this point, but when I was starting it, I thought of the younger version of myself. When I was 8, I was visiting my father. My parents were divorced. I lived with my mom full time in Massachusetts, and my dad lived in Georgia. And one day after summer camp, he had to sit me down in his office and tell me that my mom had been killed in a motorcycle accident. And that was my life shift moment. It wasn't necessarily when my mother died, but when my father said the words. And after he said those words, it was like everything about my life seemed to disappear, because all the things that I knew living full time with my mom were no longer going to be possible. And now I was going to have to move and live with a different parent and meet new friends and try a different school. So that's really the moment that the idea of who I was going to be before was gone, and I had to create something new.
Did you keep any remnants of who you were before? Or did you feel like you had to create something completely new?
I am sure that I brought some remnants. I think it was probably subconscious, but I really, if I look at that younger version of me, it's really hard because I was really young, but if I look at that younger version of me to what I became after she died, it's totally different. It was late 80s, so people weren't really talking about grief or how to heal or a kid healing. And so I assumed that all the adults around me needed to see that I was fine and that I was going to be okay, which then brought on perfectionism kind of tendencies, that if I wasn't perfect, well, then my dad would also leave, because I guess a death feels like abandonment as a child. And so really it snowballed from there. I just became a different, like before I didn't care about school. I was smart, I did my things, but like a C was fine. A C was no longer fine after that. Moving forward, it was always have to be in the top of your class, or there was a fear of what might happen. So it's kind of hard to say if I brought any remnants. I'm sure I did.
Tell me a little bit more about the self that you were before you were 8, maybe not
Yeah.
related to school, but just
Yeah.
your personality, how you played. Do you remember it all?
I don't remember a ton, but I do remember a very worryless existence, which I
Mhm.
think is good for a kid. I think I didn't have any worries. Although my parents were divorced, I felt that I could be myself and do whatever I wanted and play. I was an only child, so I would play a lot with adults. So that was very much, like I was more used to playing with people that were much older than me and communicating with them. So I guess that served me later. But I remembered just not caring about things, in a way that things were not that important, if you will. Things were just they were, and I didn't think beyond that. So it's probably all I can remember. I was told that I was the dirtiest kid on the playground when my father would have softball games and everyone brought their kids and I would come back the dirtiest. So I know I probably had a great amount of time, a great time and a lot of adventure in that. But yeah, I think it was very carefree, which I would hope that a lot of kids have.
And do you find that carefree spirit reawakening in you or not?
I think more so now than ever. I really struggled for 2+ decades of like finding my way through grief, mostly just pushing it down and then finally letting that into my life in my 30s and then facing other deaths in which I was able to do things quote unquote right for myself. And I think since that, I would say that I am now coming into more of a carefree-ish life. I would say that there's still the worries that I think most adults have about finances and relationships and those kind of things, but I I tend to lean into myself more these days than
Mm.
what other people might think of what I'm doing or saying, which was my whole life before that. It was very programmed and prescribed to impress.
In what are ways do you think are helpful to face into grief and to digest it?
It was very much an unwinding in my 30s when I was finally able to face my mom's death. I think hers, because I was in my 30s, it almost as soon as I was ready to do it, it was a lot easier because I didn't remember her. So that made
Mm.
it really, I don't want to say easy, but it was just something that I just had to process that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't, you
Right.
know, I didn't have to do all these things out of fear that someone else was going to leave. They never were. So it was really more about grieving the version of me that I could have been than it
Mm.
was grieving the loss of my mother. But then my grandmother kind of took my dad's mom took over that relationship, that motherly relationship with me. We became very, very close in the time since my mom died. And when she was diagnosed with cancer, that triggered something in me, knowing full well that I had to approach it differently. I had to lean into the fact that she was not going to live as long as we had hoped. And so I feel like I did everything right with that, both for me and for my grandmother, of not shying away from the hard conversations, having the final conversations before the person dies, sitting by their side until the last breath comes out. I
Mm.
did all those things, and I think I wouldn't have done them had I not had the experience of sudden loss with my mom at such a young age. So for for that, anytime I face grief now, I take it as it is for me. How I'm
Mm.
feeling is okay at any moment. If I'm sad, that's okay. If I'm mad, that's okay. If I'm happy about something that happened in my life, that's also okay, and not attaching shame to the different emotions that might come about. My grandfather just died a couple weeks ago, and it was different because I could honor the life that he had lived. He lived 94 years and he had
Wow.
this beautiful life, and I don't want to say I wasn't sad, but I wasn't devastated,
Right.
right? Like I had a good relationship with him. We did great things. I know he loved me. I loved him. Like, and so that one was really kind of easy to face. And I don't know if it's because I've had more tragic ones in the past, but I didn't answer your question, but I feel like grief for me was really leaning into me and less
Mm.
what I thought other people needed to see me
Mm.
during the grief process.
It's interesting. I heard you say, I didn't remember my mother, although when you were sharing the story about what it was like to be in her home, you did share about her in a way. You shared about there was a sense of safety or comfort or space for you to be free. And
Yeah,
that is really talking about her.
that's a good point. I never thought of it that way. I guess I think of the black and white of it, of what did she sound like? What did she smell like? Like those pieces are just not in my head anymore. But you make a good point that I felt very safe. I felt there was no worry, which I think is a beautiful thing.
It is beautiful, and I don't know that that many people had that as children. And so for you to share the space that she held in her
Yeah.
role with you, that's really profound, and it's meaningful, I guess I want to
Yes.
say. So,
Thank you for that.
yeah, absolutely. It was touching when you said that. I believe that as you continue to heal and grow, that more of that sense of inner safety as you tune into yourself more deeply,
Mhm.
that that inner safety will become available to you because she showed it to you, right? You'll get
Yeah.
to absorb more of who she is in a certain kind of way through that relationship. So I'm excited for you moving forward.
Thank you. I do hear from my family members of like how certain things that I do remind me, or the way I respond to things remind them of her. And I don't know, I'm not doing anything intentionally. So I guess there's some good pieces that have laid the foundation, I guess, that still live with me.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you were with her for 8 years. That's
Yeah.
a lot of time to have what I would call a somatic felt sense imprint that may not be cognitive, but
Right.
is inside your cellular memory, maybe not your cognitive memory, but is inside you
Yeah.
in a certain kind of way that lives through you. And that's really powerful. I'm I think when you said when we started, like, what's your intention? And you said something about listening. What does listening mean to you?
This podcasting journey has been all about learning how to listen. And I say that because of that perfectionism that I was bringing through the world. So much of my time was spent thinking about how I could make sure everyone knew I was okay, I was smart, I was fine. I would bring things to the table. And I think of like corporate situations in which I
Hmm.
was in meetings. I was never listening to actually absorb information. I was listening for the next silence and thinking of the question or the statement that I could say to impress, to make it sound like I was approved to be in the position that I was holding. And so starting the podcast, it was no longer about me trying to impress anyone else. It was about me holding, I'll be a little cheesy here, but holding the space for someone to share their story in the way that I've designed the podcast, and really ask the questions that I felt I wasn't allowed to ask growing up. You know, the things you dig into that you're told you shouldn't ask those questions because they're too private or whatever. And so listening has allowed me to be more curious because now I can ask those curious questions and be okay if someone is like, no, I don't want to answer that, or no, you're wrong, or any of those things where the younger versions of myself would be so afraid of even asking the question because it might be a no, or I might be wrong. So it seems weird to answer what does listening mean to you, but that has opened the door for me to expand, I guess, in feeling connected to other people versus protecting myself.
Man, it's so interesting listening to you talk because as you're sharing that, I feel like you're going back to the younger than 8 year old. Like you talked about the younger version, but
Yeah.
you're talking about the performing perfectionist version. And there is this other version of you that
Yeah.
it feels like you're getting to access through the podcast, and just how brilliant our beings are to create these opportunities for us to come home to ourselves, even though we don't know that we're doing that. You know, it's just beautiful listening to you.
Oh, thank you. It has I say it almost every episode now. There is something very selfish about this show for me in a way because it has healed me
Yes.
in ways that I never knew I needed, and never, like I wasn't seeking that. But just by listening, I've been able to connect with people all over the world that I probably never would have met. And they trust me with some of their most personal or deeply personal stories. And that in itself then gives me something more because now this person that I didn't know 10 minutes ago is telling me something really, really deep and we're connecting on that level. So it's fascinating to me, but also it's beautifully selfish to do this podcast because I get something from it too. I'm not, yes, the listener is going to get something, that hopefully the guest is getting something, but I too am getting something really valuable.
I'm wondering if we could shift the word selfish
I
to
knew you were going to say that.
to restorative.
It
It's
unexpectedly so.
unexpectedly restorative and just beautiful. I love that
Yeah.
for you.
It just means that I'll never stop because as cheesy as it sounds, I think of that 8-year-old sitting on the chair in front of my dad's office desk when he was about to tell me something. And I think of him when people are telling me these very line in the sand moments. And then I get curious as to how they somehow, despite the hardest of experiences that I've heard, are resilient and move through the world through something in the moment that feels very impossible to overcome. So it's like, wow, like how I think we've all been in a situation in which we're like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this.
Right.
And somehow people do, if we're lucky,
Absolutely.
I guess.
I always say that there's an impulse, a life giving impulse inside of us that keeps moving us in spite of ourselves. And
Hmm.
sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it works well, and sometimes it kind of works well, you know, depending on the circumstances and the individuals. And it's always working on our behalf. And
Yeah.
that's something that I find very miraculous and wonderful.
It's hard to put myself sometimes in others' situations as they describe them to me, but where I find the connection is in the emotions that we feel around those circumstances. And then I feel connected to them because I know what that feels like,
Yeah,
even though my circumstance is wildly different. It's really
absolutely.
nice to discover in my 40s.
Absolutely. You also said something really interesting that you learned that it wasn't your fault because neurologically, it's about around the ages 11, between 10 and 12, we do not have the neurological development to differentiate. So all experiences get interpreted through our minds as our fault. So your mother's death gets interpreted as your fault, even though there is no relationship to you being in Georgia and your mother getting killed in a motorcycle accident. There's no way they
Right.
have anything to do with each other, but I think it's important for our listeners to understand that that happens inside of us. Even if someone walks in the room and they're in a bad mood before the ages of 10 to 12, you think, what did I do to cause that bad mood? We don't
Hmm.
have the skill level to not do that. And I really appreciate that you brought that up, that we all have to face the way our minds have held us prisoner for accountability for things that have no reason to be accountable for and to relieve ourselves of that. Was that for you a really pivotal moment to go, this really wasn't my fault?
Oh, yeah. But it wasn't until my 30s
Right.
that I realized that. And then it was in a therapist's office. I had tried and tried. It's funny because I was triggered by a work situation and that's why I went to therapy, but it ended up helping me in this other side, which was great. But my therapist was like, you realize that every decision that you've made since you were 8 has been out of fear that someone else was going to leave. And for me, that opened the door to the grief journey of closing that door. I say closing, people don't like that, but really feeling like I've processed it. And it it made me think of, for so long I had attached blame to myself for my mom dying because before I left for Georgia, I threw a temper tantrum, told her I didn't want to go. I didn't want her to go. Like, and so
Mm,
in my mind, probably not even right away, but like maybe in my teens, I pulled back that moment. I was like, well, that it's my fault because I didn't cry hard enough. I didn't scream loud enough. I didn't do all these things. And had I been worse as a child at that moment, maybe she wouldn't have gone. Maybe I wouldn't have gone to Georgia. So at 30 something, I was like, oh, well, you were a kid. There was no
Right.
changing this 32-year-old woman's mind because her 8-year-old is acting like a fool, you
Right.
know? So, but it took so long. The funny thing to me is it's so logical, yet so illogical when you're living it and you can't break through that
Right.
particular thing. Like I could have thought of that years prior, but my brain was just protecting me in some way or using it as a crutch or a blame. So it was really interesting. But when that floodgate opened, it was like, this is a lot, but also I can do this.
Thank you for that.
Hmm.
I think sometimes we have to do a lot of work inside of ourselves to be ready to do the work, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like, and I mean, I hope the listeners are understanding that the journey is slow. We're only ready when we're ready and not to
Yeah.
push a river that isn't ready to move yet because the right things have to be in place. We have to have enough resource inside of ourselves so that we don't crash and burn, like,
Yeah.
and to trust the process that you will evolve. And I'm sure you're still evolving and growing. Is that true?
I would imagine so. I think so. I feel, well, and to your point, maybe I'm evolving to more of that younger version of me, the
Yes.
the younger version that was living his own life instead of living a life for other people, which I did for quite a quite a few years. And so I'm very much leaning into it. And I do credit the podcast for that. Not the podcast itself, but the ability to have these conversations with people that live totally different lives and learn from them and connect with them in ways that maybe are surprising sometimes. So yeah, I think I'm always evolving with these conversations.
And what do you imagine could be more possible for you inside yourself? I don't mean in the
Yeah,
world, but just inside of you. What more?
I think there's still some things that I could let go of. I think there's still some mental health things that trickle through that I know that I can overcome, but I haven't been ready to let go because I don't know about you, but some of those things become a comfort if you
Mm-hmm.
if you have them and do them for a long time. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth there. I still have challenges with limiting beliefs. So I think that's something to overcome. I think logically I can think all the big things, but then something pulls me back down that I might mess up or it might not be true or it might take too long or whatever, all the things, that can happen in one's brain. So I think there's still a lot of opportunity. I don't know that I could tell you what's possible, but I'm open to seeing what is possible.
What would it be like to find greater sense of freedom and expansiveness inside of you?
What would it be like? It would be
Yeah.
wonderful because it would give me more space to do like the creative things and the things that bring me joy and connect with my friends and family. But that space is right now currently a little occupied with the things that I know aren't serving me well. But realistically, that's where I am. It would be beautiful though. I can't imagine what that's like, but I'd like to.
Great. I like that for you, Matt, to keep that on like some kind of vision board, the image or the vision of you being freer and more spacious and creative and vibrant in a way that matches who you really are.
Yeah, I think he's in there.
He's in there.
And he comes out every once in a while, but sometimes I put him back in his place.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about what more is possible or what more is possible for you to evolve or grow into, there is this, I can, being with you, there is this possibility of a greater expansiveness and spaciousness and creativity and freedom, like what you talked about before 8. And that hasn't fully reformed in you. I'm going to go
Yes.
reform. So when we think about the podcast as restoration and this evolutionary processes reformation, I feel like there's so much more available to you in your
Yeah.
future, and I'm really excited for you.
I'm so happy to be on this journey, and I do believe that. I do believe
Yes,
there's more to come.
I feel that for you for sure. I'm excited for you. And did
I'm
you?
ready.
Yeah, good. I love that. I'm ready for you to be ready. And did you just write a book?
I
Or
did, and it's kind of I did write it. It's those are my words. But what it is it's like a collection of a lot of the stories that I've had on the Life Shift podcast. And so what I did over the last 4 years is I've identified some of these stories that really kind of stuck with me, if you will. And
mm-hmm.
for this book, I give each story two elements. One is the life shift moment as I saw it, as I remember it, as it stood out to me. And then the other part of it is what I think that could mean for me and others, like
Mm,
what we could take away from that story. So I'm not trying to prescribe anything to anyone, but I want to really center each part on that pivot, whatever it is, whether it's
nice.
traumatic, whether it's intentional, whatever that might be. And so there's 104 stories collected in this particular book called Still Here. And I
Nice.
think it's like one of those ones where you could pick it up and pick any page and read that particular piece. And I loved putting it together. It was a challenge, but I loved putting it together. And then I did it all myself. So you know, I figured out I knew how to get it on Amazon because I have a bunch of coloring books and whatnot on there now. So I know all the publishing stuff. But yeah, it was really one of those things where I wanted to do it. So I did it and I didn't
Awesome.
have anything stop me.
Awesome. I love that for you. Thank you. We're going to have to wind down for today. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you think the purpose for life is?
What I've realized now is probably connection. I think my
Mm,
purpose, at least a strong purpose now, is realizing how much we have in common with each other through our feelings and the way that we approach things or the way that we think about things. And so much of my life was boxes, and we were putting things in boxes, and that's how you connect with others, and it's not true. I talk to so many
mm,
people that live nothing like me, but I relate to them. So I think that I've learned now here, probably I would say in my 40s, is that the purpose is to just connect more with people and realize that we're not that different.
I love that. Thank you so much. How
Mhm.
can people get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way is to go to the lifeshiftpodcast.com and then just, reach out to me. I'm on all the socials, but everything is linked there. And I would love to hear from people. I love sharing my story, but also hearing other people's stories. So, yeah, point them my way. Be happy to connect.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being here today, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for opening my eyes to some of the things that I hadn't thought about before. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. I'm so glad to have you here. Subscribe so you can be informed about the upcoming episodes. We're thrilled to have you here. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts, and this is the Purpose for Life podcast. And until next time, keep living.